Today marks 56 years since one of the most notorious incidents of political violence in U.S. history, the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was shot and killed on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. The civil rights leader, accused by conservatives of being a communist agitator, had gone to Memphis to support striking sanitation workers. Now, 56 years later, the Republican Party's presumptive nominee for president is a man who celebrates political violence. Donald Trump has ominously warned of a bloodbath if he's not elected, and vowed to release people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th, people he calls hostages, as one of his first acts if elected. So let's just take a moment to look at some of these so-called hostages. NBC News analyzed 15 of the January 6th defendants currently in pretrial detention. There's a former Special Forces soldier accused of spearing an officer in the face with a flagpole. One man faces January 6th charges but wasn't arrested until last year after he showed up at former President Obama's home with weapons in his van. Trump had posted a screenshot of Obama's address on social media. There's also the Florida man accused of assaulting law enforcement officers and setting off an explosive device inside a Capitol tunnel. Joining me now is Ryan Riley, NBC News justice reporter, and Harry Dunn, former Capitol police officer who is running for Congress from Maryland. Thank you both for being here. Ryan, I want you to tell me more about these so-called hostages.
Yeah, so what we really tried to focus on here was those individuals who are detained pretrial, because those are the people who haven't yet been convicted of any crimes. And I think that's a reasonable way to look at this. Look at people who haven't actually been convicted by a jury or by judges and see why they're being held. And what we found is that all these people are being held for very good reasons that judges have laid out and made individualized decisions why they need to be held. It's usually a risk of flight or a danger to the community why they're being held. Included in that group is, as you mentioned, someone who threw that explosive device into the tunnel where some of the worst attacks of the day took place, where, Officer Mike Fanone was dragged out of that tunnel and had a stun gun driven into his neck. That's where a lot of that violence took place. And a lot of those individuals who were in that tunnel at that time had ringing in their ears for days afterwards. They lost their hearing temporarily. Officers told the FBI that they believed that they were going to die. They were in this confined space being attacked by the mob for hours, and then that explosion goes off. There's another individual who NBC News first reported about 2 years ago, but wasn't arrested until this year, who actually fired off a gun twice outside of the Capitol on January 6th, and he's one of those individuals now being held in pretrial detention. One of the ones that really sticks out to me is Edward Kelly. He's an individual who was actually the fourth person to go inside the Capitol that day. He was dressed up in paramilitary gear. He allegedly assaulted a police officer outside, broke that window open, busted that fire door open so that the rest of the mob could come in. Nevertheless, he was released pre-trial. That's how most of these cases have been handled. But he was rearrested months later because the FBI alleged that he was plotting to kill the FBI employees who were investigating him. And his co-defendant in that case has actually already pleaded guilty to that crime, admitting that the two of them conspired to kill FBI agents because of the investigation into them. Edward Kelly has pleaded not guilty initially. He was in talks for a plea deal, but apparently that case could go to trial, which is separate and apart from the underlying January 6 charges that he's also facing.
Harry Dunn, your thoughts as a police officer, a former police officer, of Donald Trump saying these people that you just heard Ryan describe are hostages who he's going to release upon becoming president if he does?
Sure. Good to see you both. I just get so incensed just sitting here listening to what just Ryan says. He's been on top of it and uncovering the actual truths about the thing. I will push back a little bit because he uses the words allegedly when it's not really alleged, when we saw it all on tape happen. So got to push back a little bit there, Ryan. But, Donald Trump, just think about how much the narrative has changed from first it was Antifa to then it was no big deal to then it was a tourist visit to then we need to move on from it to now Donald Trump campaigning off of it. Think about these MAGA people, the MAGA faction of the Republican Party. It's just kind of hijacked it, and they're all over the place with what they want to be. It's a slap in the face to law enforcement. It's a slap in the face to me, to my coworkers, to the brave men and women of Metropolitan Police Department who put their lives on the line to protect this democracy. So it's ridiculous that that's where they're going right now.
And some of these people, Ryan, are also running for office, right?
That's
Not
right.
the ones who were in pretrial detention, but some of the other January 6th people.
That's right, and one was actually endorsed by a sitting member of Congress. Derek Evans is an individual who pleaded guilty to charges and served 3 months behind bars. And I remember sitting through his hearing, and he was extremely apologetic for his conduct on January 6th. He actually did it via Zoom, so he had the opportunity to put a giant photo of his young children in the background to sort of make a sympathetic appeal to the judge there. And I think that, the Judge Lamberth, who's actually spoken out very strongly about the need to bring people back to reality about what happened on January 6th, I think was somewhat, sympathetic to him because he did seem apologetic, but he's just completely reversed course and is now running on this notion that, this was all a setup and that, the election was still stolen and that, Joe Biden is going after the quote unquote patriots who were supporting Donald Trump on January 6th. So a real reversal of what he said in court versus what he's saying, I guess on the campaign trail now at this point.
Harry Dunn, there's also Donald Trump saying that he plans to jail his political opponents if he comes back in. So he wants to free the violent felons who beat police officers and fired guns in the air and committed various crimes. But he says he wants to jail his political opponents. Is that something that you worry about? We know that some of the January 6th committee members are feeling that they would have a target on them. You've been vocal, too. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so going back to what you just said about those individuals that are running for Congress, guess what? So is this good guy right here. It's very important for good people to stand up and fight back against it. Lord forbid if we get people like that in Congress. And to speak about the whole MAGA thing, the individuals, like you said, that are running, coincidentally, as I come out and speaking about and fighting against MAGA money entered the race that I'm in right now in a Maryland Democratic primary. You have a group that supports MAGA insurrectionists and funded Donald Trump, literally donating money in my race right now because they know I'm out to get them and going to hold them accountable. But as far as what the target on lawmakers' back, you're right. Absolutely. They should be afraid because, we got to start taking Donald Trump at his word. Just the fact that he said he's going to be a dictator and all, he's making these threats. At what point do we continue? We stop taking him as a joke, and we have to act. We have to stand up. We have to vote. It's very important for everybody to get involved, and that's one of the reasons why I'm running right now. Lord forbid if we get 3 people that stormed the Capitol on January 6th that are legislating our government. What are we doing?
Yeah. It's a great question. Well said. Ryan Riley, excellent reporting. Thank you very much. And The Sedition Hunters is Ryan's book. You all should pick that up too. Harry Dunn, thank you very much. And best of luck in your campaign.
Hey, everyone. MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.